Plot: the elements of a story. What is a plot? A plot is a story structure, or what I like to look at as the skeleton of a story. It's the foundation that stories are written off of. So a traditional plot has 5 elements: the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. The exposition is the beginning of the story, and this is typically when you're going to meet the main characters, find out the setting, and also be introduced to the major conflict in the story or the major problem. The rising action is the biggest part of the story. It's about 75% of the story, and it is when the conflict or problem in the story continuously builds, kind of like going up a roller coaster, one link at a time. The conflict gets worse and worse and worse until it gets to a breaking point. And that breaking point is known as the climax. We also call this the turning point, and this is typically when the main character figures something out that's been bothering them the entire time, or makes a decision to completely transform their life. So that's usually the climax of the story. And the falling action is the event or events that happen right after the climax in the story that lead up to the resolution or the ending of the story. And the resolution is when the conflict is finally solved, or when the loose ends of the story are tied up in a perfect little bow. Let's take a look at the classic story, Hansel and Gretel, and we're going to be chatting about the plot of this wicked little story. Oh, pun intended. That's my version of a witch cackle. So in the exposition of Hansel and Gretel, you meet their parents along with Hansel and Gretel, and you find out they actually have a really terrible mother and a father who has absolutely no backbone. But let's get back to the exposition, shall we? So the story takes place in the past in a village, and the conflict that you see in the story is there's a famine or a food shortage that's going on in their village. It's so bad that the parents aren't even able to keep Hansel and Gretel, and that terrible, horrible mother comes up with a terrible, horrible decision. The rising action is when the major conflict in the story gets increasingly worse. So the major conflict in Hansel and Gretel is there's a famine in the village that they live in. The parents can't take care of them, so they take Hansel and Gretel into the forest. Hansel outsmarts them though. Hansel puts white rocks into his pocket to leave a trail for him and Gretel to find their way home. And they do find their way home, but the famine once again increasingly gets worse, and the parents have to take them deeper into the forest so that they don't find their way home. Hansel's unable to get stones this time, so he uses breadcrumbs to try to leave a trail. But birds eat the breadcrumbs, and they're not able to find their way home. They're actually traveling through the forest for 3 days until they stumble upon a house that's made of treats, which is yay, our good luck. But it's not really their good luck, because the house actually belongs to a witch who eats children. The climax of the story is when there's a turning point and Hansel and Gretel's terrible luck changes. See, the evil witch wants to eat Hansel, and she's been fattening him up for a few weeks. And one morning she just decides, you know what? I'm hankering for some Hansel, and she tells Gretel to go light the oven. But Gretel's not dumb. She also realizes that as soon as she gets in front of the oven, the witch is going to push her in and kill her as well. So she pretends like she doesn't know how to turn the oven on or light the oven, and the witch gets really frustrated, steps in front of the oven, and shows Gretel, look, you can light it, you can get inside there, it's not scary. But Gretel knows her ploy. She knows what she's up to. So instead of the witch pushing Gretel in, Gretel pushes her in. So the following action is the event that happens directly after the climax of the story. So in Hansel and Gretel, the event that happens after the witch gets burnt up to a crisp is that Gretel goes to Hansel's broke down cage and lets him out, and both of them shove their pockets full of jewelry and stones and pearls and all sorts of goodies because the witch doesn't need it anymore. And they decide that they're going to head back home, which I think is like really telling of how amazing these kids are, because hello, their parents left them inside of a forest, and instead of just staying at this, house that's full of goodies and all sorts of jewels and awesomeness, they decide to go back home and share it. So the end of this story is that Hansel and Gretel find their way home and they learn their terrible, horrible, no good, evil mother has passed away. Huzzah! But their father is alive and super downtrodden and tragic and just filled with so much sorrow ever since his children left his side. Which, come on now, we know that they didn't just leave his side, he actually made them leave his side. But Hansel and Gretel are far more merciful and gracious than I am, and they empty their pockets of jewels and share them with their father, leaving the whole family to live happily ever after. The end. Let's review. Stories have to have a plot or a structure. And there are 5 elements to a traditional plot. They are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. An exposition is the beginning of the story. It introduces the main characters, the setting, and the major conflict. The rising action is the largest part of the story, and it's when the major conflict in the story intensified. Think about being on a roller coaster and riding it up to the tallest peak. And that tallest peak is the climax. It is the turning point in the story. The falling action is the event that happens right after the climax. So think of going down that hill in a roller coaster. And the resolution is the end of the story. It's the end of the ride. It's when all the loose ends are tied up and the conflict is usually solved. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a lot about plot and the elements of plot. And if you didn't, well then, watch the video again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. TTFN, ta-ta for now.